Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Conor Canney Podcast with me, Conor Canney. And in today's podcast, I want to talk about growing up in a dysfunctional family. Now, there are many people out there who grew up in dysfunctional families. There are people who grew up in completely horrific, horrible, the worst kind of conditions you could ever imagine. Then there are people who grew up in, pretty rough conditions. Then there are people that grew up in a dysfunctional family which had the extra component of being having some good nurturing love within that family also, right? Sometimes from the same parent, which is even more confusing growing up, and oftentimes for those of us that was the environment I personally grew up in. I received a lot of love and support, and also a lot of emotional, verbal abuse, a bit of physical abuse, a handful of times, but nothing like where the physical abuse was so consistent and so bad throughout my life, where it was like, oh my God, I was constantly physically abused or anything. No, there wasn't like that. But mostly it was a mental, emotional, verbal, psychological kind of abuse, like consistently from my dad. For much of my life, not when I was a very young child. He wasn't like that then. The first time I can remember like anything was sometime between the age of 7 and 10 when it started to get bad, and it just got worse and worse throughout my life. As I got older, as I became a teenager, as I wanted to push boundaries more and do my own thing. Parents who want to control their children really have a problem with, when the more the child wants to rebel as they become a teenager and start questioning things and start wanting more freedom, the more the parent, the controlling parent, wants to nail down and stop them from doing what they want to do and constantly criticize them. Now, anyone who's watching this, who's clicked on this video, who's listening to this, I'm assuming that you either have no idea what it's like to grow up in a dysfunctional family, and you've simply either listened to my other podcasts on this channel, or you've come across this one, or you never heard of me before, or this podcast, or you've come across this channel, or you are someone who knows what it's like growing up in a dysfunctional family, right? Some of you may still be in a dysfunctional place, and you know the burden of what it's like. Like, some people everyone's at different points in their journey of going from a dysfunctional family, or escaping it, or healing from it, or whatever. Some people never do. Some people are in dysfunctional relationships all their life as well. But if you are someone who has grown up in a dysfunctional family, and you try to explain it to other people that have grown up in a healthy environment, right? When some of them, not all of them, to be fair, some of them don't understand this, right? They can only ever see things through especially when it's not complete, like something where you can really point to it, like sexual abuse or extreme physical abuse. With the emotional abuse, right? Emotional abuse is such a grey area, right? That people that don't grow up in that environment don't really don't understand what you mean sometimes when you say it, especially if, like, my father, my dad, did a lot of good stuff as well, right? But 90% of the stuff, 80 to 90% of his attitude and towards me, my brother and my mum, was one of contempt, control, nastiness, criticism, putting down, right, which came from his parents, and the whole when we grow up in this environment and you try to explain it to other people who haven't grown up, sometimes they don't know what the fuck you're talking about. They can't understand what you're talking about, right? They've never experienced it. They're only viewing it through the prism, through the lens of somebody who has grown up in a functional family that got all of the positive things that many of us didn't get growing up. To be fair to me, to be fair to my dad, I did get a lot of positive things that from my dad and my mum, that a lot of people don't get as well, in terms of love and support. But I also got a lot of abuse, like not so much from my mum really, but from my dad. My mum made mistakes and stuff. She wasn't perfect, but the main brunt of the whole thing was just my dad, really. And what's the point here? My point is, there might be people out there who are listening to this, who are watching this video, who listen to this podcast, who understand exactly where I'm coming from when I say this, because people that go through, that grow up, that have all of their needs met as a child, right, and don't have to, they have all of their needs met, right, and two, they don't have the things that we had to worry about growing up. They don't have the negative effect on them growing up, right? They don't have the subconscious, the later, when we transition into adults, the later, the things that we were missing, and they don't understand how it affects us, right? They also don't understand how, that we're like struggling. It's like we're walking around with, with like weights, the weights that athletes use on the legs to train when they run. It's like they're walking down a hill, we're walking with weights on, right? Trying to do the same thing that they're doing, in the form of all the baggage from our lack of self-esteem, our the neurological pathways that may not have been built, the mental, emotional, spiritual muscle that may not have been built in order to achieve certain things, or have certain attitudes, or feel certain things, right? Or certain ideas about ourselves, right? It's almost like our programming's off, right? When you grow up in an abusive environment, like our nervous system also, there's a lot of unexpressed emotion that we were never allowed to feel. There's a lot of unexpressed emotion that was caused by things that our nervous system had to react to, that other people didn't have to react to, be it screaming, shouting, anger. And some people, like I say, have been physically abused, and obviously some people have been sexually abused, but that's I'm not really qualified to talk about that, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But I mean, a handful of times, there was some physical altercations and stuff, but really, not that it's ever right, but really that wasn't the majority of times. That was only a handful of times, right? For the most part, my dad wasn't really into hitting kids, because he was hit, he was beaten as a child. As a lot of people of his generation were people that were born in the 60s. A lot of their parents were born, in the 40s, 30s, 20s. His parents were born in the 20s, and that generation was raised by people that were born in like the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, so like they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. But for the most part, my dad didn't really, wasn't a physical thing. He was physically domineering, and he could take up space when he wanted to be a bully, right? But that was a whole other thing. And he was extremely aggressive from time to time. But there's a lot of subtle putting down and stuff. But anyway, the point I'm making, what was I saying? I'm saying when we grow up in these environments, there are a lot of things that we need to, a lot of baggage, emotional, mental, even physiological baggage, like I said, stuff that's ingrained in our nervous system that isn't ingrained in the nervous systems of people who grew up in healthy environments, you know. And oftentimes we can't, they don't have a clue what it's like, you know, at all. And it can be very hurtful, right? It can be very hurtful. It can be very frustrating trying to explain it to them, especially if you're with you're like now you've healed from it a little bit, or I've pretty much healed from it. But you know, the healing process is long. Well, it took me probably 3 years, and along that time there've been intermittent times where it kind of like, it's almost like PTSD, where it comes back and something happens because of something that's happened in your childhood, you know, or your teenage years, or even as a young adult growing up with your family. This is my experience anyway. Some, you know, things can happen and it can just trigger you, you know, to get angry, to get upset, whatever. You still have certain behaviours in the same way that, regardless of whether you grow up in a dysfunctional family or a healthy family, even if you grow up in a healthy family, you're definitely going to be influenced by the things that we all are influenced by the things that we do unconsciously, you know, by that we've learnt by the nurturing that we got, with the examples of parents or parent we have. Some of us grow up with single parents. But what was my point there? Sorry, I've gone off on a bit of tangent here. We all know, all of us that grow up in a really dysfunctional family, we all know like the horrible feelings of just like all of the shit that we had to put up with that other people didn't have to put up with. They're never going to understand, right? And you know, it's really I'm really fortunate that my mum has been very, very good over the last 3 years of like nurturing me and letting me do what I want to do and letting me heal and talking to me and almost being a therapist to some degree, because she obviously went through a lot of stuff as well, which I'm not going to get into in this podcast. But basically, that, you know, it's really difficult when we grow up in these environments and the healing process. So, first of all, I want to say to anyone out there who's listening, I know what it's like. I've been through it, and I've now feel like I'm totally back to where I'm not back to, but at a place where I've healed from all of that. You know, and I feel very much, consider myself very fortunate and lucky in that regard, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people go through things with both parents. And like I said, like whilst my mum made some mistakes and stuff, it was never like the horrible nastiness that I received from the words and attitude and energy I received from my father, right? But I suppose in this little podcast, I just wanted to put it out there that it's an idea for anyone, you know, who's gone through it. I know what it's like, and you know, so I know what it's also like to tell other people who don't understand, and I know what it's like to have them almost make you feel like you're the one in the wrong. Like there's nothing, especially people that know my dad who don't have a clue what he's really like, right? They only see glimmers of tiny things. They'll never understand, right? They'll never understand that. Why would they? Like, don't blame them. Or why would they? When people are manipulative and people are telling one side of the story to make out as if they haven't done anything wrong, you know, it's like people can't believe how much of a liar and how much of a kick some sick and twisted individuals like my dad could get out of certain things. You know, the word get out of bullying his children, right? And that comes from being bullied by his mum and being put down all the time by his dad, essentially, right? And you know, a lot of us go through that, and these things are always passed down through the generations. You know, whether it be the most horrific kind of abuse, sexual abuse, or physical abuse, or emotional abuse. And obviously, sexual abuse and physical abuse are forms of emotional abuse as well. But the verbal abuse, the non-physical many of us have suffered, that's extreme, that people think, people say, oh, weren't we all abused? People have said to me, friends of my dad have said this to me before, oh, people, because they don't know what he's really like. So people are, every generation, I remember when I was growing up, it was the norm to hit kids. It's not like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like serious mind games and shit, and just complete contempt and nastiness, and constantly gaslighting and putting things on someone else, on your children and other people. The control element, not allowing you to do what you want to do, the real horribleness, the bullying, the aggression, all that shit, right? They don't know what kind of pieces of shit some of us had to deal with as fathers and mothers, That being said, I do still feel sorry for my dad that he turned out like that, because he did have a very good side to him as well. This is what happens when people grow up in fucked up environments where they're not allowed to be themselves. He was never allowed to be himself, so he didn't want us to be himself. Now, he learnt and changed. He wasn't as bad in some ways as his parents were to him, but in some ways he was worse than them in some ways, and they were more ignorant, and they went on to be great grandparents, and went on to be really kind. Well, my grandma went on to be really kind, for the most part. And my granddad, for the most part, was kind, but he still put his son down all the time, all his life. And my grandma was controlling and nasty and abusive when she was younger to my dad and his brothers. But so I do feel sorry for my dad, but it's like, there are plenty of other people that had just as bad and way worse upbringings than my dad that didn't go on to do that. Now, at the same time, even though people say that, I still, things affect people in different ways, don't they? So that's obviously how he was affected by it, and that's how he dealt with it. And he's a prime example, my dad, of someone who never dealt with what happened to him when he was younger. He was in complete denial about it. His parents were in complete denial. Our whole family was dysfunctional and complete denial about it. Constantly looking to scapegoat me, scapegoat my brother, scapegoat my mum to a degree. Not really my mum that much, but to them, but definitely scapegoat me and my brother. It's how dysfunctional families survive. They can't look at the truth or look at themselves, look at the dog shit fucking poison behaviour that's going on. Right. And don't get me wrong, my family gave me a lot of love and support as well. They're not the worst family in the world, but in terms of the most controlling and the most fucked up, my dad definitely, in some ways, was probably turned out the worst. A lot swings and roundabouts. Did a lot of good things, did a lot of bad things. Could have been worse, could have been better. But it's not like there is a true part of it. There is a genuine, horrible, just nasty dog shit fucking game where he just wants to bully his children. It was horrible, growing up in a lot of ways. But there are people that have been treated way worse than me as well. I'm not under any illusion about that. But there are also plenty of people. Most people have not experienced that kind, especially of my generation in a first world country, have not experienced that kind of emotional abuse that I experienced. Right. Back in the day, it was more black. It was more grey area because people were less aware of the effects that things had on children, right? But it's not like this guy isn't an intelligent, informed guy about a lot of things, and like I say, I do have a lot of sympathy for him, but it is what it is. Anyway, in the next podcast, guys and girls, I hope that as some of you have gained just by listening to me talking about it a bit of, some of you can relate. Well, first of all, I hope none of you, I don't wish it upon any of you that you've gone through that you can relate, but I mean, I hope that if you have gone through something similar to me in your life, that I'm given you some like hope that you can heal from it, and you can and some inspiration, and just someone else to talk to, to know that there's someone else out there. There's plenty of us out there, people that have gone through worse than us even, that have, and that's, by the way, that's not to undermine anyone's experience growing up, because things affect people in different ways and stuff. So when I say worse, that's better and worse, that's a loose term, but you know what I mean. But yeah, so anyway, in the next podcast, I think I'm going to talk more about like things you can do to heal from, bad things that happen in your childhood, right? And things I personally use and things I find useful that have helped me to become a stronger person and to heal from the emotional scars of the past and try to move forward into becoming a stronger person. So thank you for listening to the Conor Canney podcast, and tune in for the next one. Bye-bye. Peace and love.